everybody, Chris White with the American Battlefield Trust, and I'm here in Columbus, Georgia at the National Civil War Naval Museum. This is a really cool museum down here in Columbus, Georgia, near Fort Moore. So if you're familiar with where we are, we're on the southwestern side of the state of Georgia, and we encourage you to come down here. We're here with special access by the staff here, and we want to thank them and encourage you to come here. This is just the tip of the iceberg, a taste of what they have. We also have another video that's going to show you a walkthrough of this amazing facility, and you'll get to walk through a reproduction of the USS Hartford. You're going to go through the CSS Albemarle, and you'll see the turret of the USS Monitor. So there's a lot of really cool things to see, to experience, and of course they have original ships here as well. Not in such the conditions you might think, but they are their largest artifacts here right beside the cameraman, Gary Edelman there. So with me today is Logan, who is one of their artifact specialists, and I want to thank you for having us here. And it looks like you pulled out a few things from your collection. To start with, before we get into what's laying on the table, approximately how many artifacts do you have in your collection here? We
actually have upwards of 2,000 artifacts. That includes both items recovered from our ships that we have on display here from the Chattahoochee River, as well as collection items related to both navies through the course of the war that we've collected through the years of operation.
That's awesome. And the ship that we have beside us, that's a huge artifact. That's the CSS Jackson, correct?
Right, yes. This is the CSS Jackson, the ironclad produced right here in Columbus, Georgia. This is kind of the centerpiece of our entire museum.
So like I said, the ships might not exactly look like you think as a ship, but this was recovered here, or near here in Columbus, Georgia, out of the Chattahoochee River. So check that out in another video. For now, though, we're going to check out some of the other cool pieces they have in their collection. So let's talk here quickly about edged weapons. So edged weapons during the Civil War are still at play, especially on naval ships. I always describe the Battle of Fort Fisher as like an Errol Flynn movie with Marines coming off the ships with cutlasses and pistols. So we have two different naval cutlasses and then a cavalry saber here. So can we talk a little bit about this first one laying here on the table?
Yeah, so both of our naval cutlasses we have on display here today are what we like to think of as almost like war trophies. So this cutlass was recovered from a Confederate blockade runner by a Union vessel off the coast of North Carolina.
And as we take a look, it's a much shorter sword as compared to the much longer cavalry.
Right, yes. Here. Yeah, this shows a very a good example of the difference between a cavalry saber and a cutlass. The sword of a cutlass being much more intended for close range, close quarters combat that would be expected and hand-to-hand combat on naval vessels.
And speaking of hands, the pommel here has a handguard over top of it, down here the handle, so you can see that this is very much going to protect you. It almost looks like a fencing saber that you would use there, so that it gives you a nice protection for your hand. And then as you move up to the next cutlass, at one point, and I'm seeing holes for rivets, it most likely also had a handguard over that pommel there for your handle. And then of course, the cavalry saber also has one, but it's more open for your hand guard. So that's one of those features that you'll have on these edged weapons. I notice they don't look like they're sharpened. Were naval cutlasses sharpened? Sometimes yes, sometimes no?
They were most of the time would have been sharpened. These items for both the age of the items as well as for the safety of them as artifacts in our collection. We don't do anything to sharpen them or keep them sharp today, but they would have been in use during the Civil War era, would have been sharpened.
And I think it's important too to remember we're on naval ships, they'd be under lock and key as well.
Right, yes. Most of the items in terms of any type of small arms, both edged weapons as well as pistols and the like, would in most cases have been more of a communal under lock and key versus each person being assigned like their own musket or something, as you might see in the Army.
Yeah, think about the mutiny on the Bounty. Also think of Pirates of the Caribbean, how many times Johnny Depp lost his ship. You give your crew weapons, they might take over your ship. So this next one that you have up here, working our way up off to my right, the camera's left, you said this one's another prize of war. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right, yeah, so this is also a war trophy. Now it's actually somewhat of the opposite story from the first cutlass we shared. This was actually, we believe, from the USS Underwriter, which was captured by the Confederate Navy in 1864, again off the coast of North Carolina. And we actually, from the provenance records we have, this ended up in the collection of on board the Confederate ship, the Surgeon, actually. So you wouldn't think of a surgeon having this type of edged weapon, but nonetheless, this was his kind of war trophy to take home with him.
And that's interesting because, you know, with the navies, you have not only war trophies, you might have what we call privateers, which were made famous during the Revolutionary War, where you get a portion of the prize whenever you take the ship or whatever's captured on it. So there's different levels of navies that we have as well. And it's interesting that you say this was captured by the Confederate Navy. They do have a Navy. I think some people don't think that there is a Confederate Navy. And I noticed in Andersonville, there were a large number in the graveyard there of United States Navy enlisted men, sailors who were there.
Right, yeah, so most people don't think of the Confederate having a Navy, or if they do, they assume, you know, kind of that David and Goliath story of, oh, the Confederate Navy must have not had any success whatsoever. But there are examples throughout the war of Confederate victories at sea.
Yeah, which is, you know, there are some famous ones. And of course, the CSS Alabama is probably the most famous. It's the Raider Alabama. Let's finish off this little section here, and we're going to check out more in the museum, talking about this sword. Can you tell us more about this sword?
Yeah, so you might wonder, why would a cavalry saber be in a naval museum? And that's actually because it was produced right here in Columbus, Georgia, by the Heyman Brothers sword factory. The Heyman Brothers were from Prussia originally and immigrated to Columbus before the war. They actually opened a tin shop before the war, making farming equipment, and then, like many other industrialists during the outbreak of the Civil War, they turned to arms production. And so here's one example of several thousand that were produced by the Heyman Brothers sword factory that were actually sold to the state of Alabama.
And it's in remarkable shape. The brass hangers are still here. That's what you attach to your belt. The pommel has the and handle still have the hand guard over top of it. Has a beautiful wrapping right around the handle. I'm not sure if that's leather. It looks like leather, not shark skin. And this is a fantastic piece. So Logan, thanks for pulling these out, and thank you for watching, and stay tuned. We're going to check out more artifacts here at this amazing museum. So we're continuing to check out the National Civil War Naval Museum here in Columbus, Georgia. So there are some really awesome artifacts tied to the American Civil War, and specifically the navies of both sides, North and the South. We have flags, we have boats, we have cannons. We're going to check out a lot of different things, but they also have some material artifacts here that are tied to individual sailors, officers, seamen. So Brandon, thanks for joining us. We're checking out two pieces of white linen and a straw hat. Can you tell us a little bit more about who wore these and what are their purpose?
Yeah, this coat and vest belonged to John Luck. John Luck was an assistant surgeon in the United States Navy serving on board the Ottawa. In January of '62, he was sent ashore to tend to the wounded after the attack on Battery Wagner. And of course, that assault was from the 54th Massachusetts. The controversy about Shaw being buried with his troops. John T. Luck was actually captured. He wasn't so lucky. He wandered too close to the Confederate lines and was captured, and actually witnessed that burial of Shaw being buried with his troops. Bit of a controversy at the time. Few months later, Luck was actually exchanged out after he gained his freedom. He started a letter writing campaign about this, that he had seen a white officer being buried with black troops, and stirred up quite a bit of controversy. And so that story that we all know from the movie Glory, and I'm sure most people have seen that, a lot of that was put into public memory by the controversy that John T. Luck witnessed.
Yeah, and I believe, we're talking about the naval blockade that's taking place in Charleston Harbor. This is one of the ships that's part of it.
Right.
He's a surgeon, goes ashore, witnesses this very famous scene. And I think later on that Shaw's family stated that they thought it was appropriate. He would want to be with his soldiers. So, still learning all the ropes at that time of how this is all going to happen. So one of the things that we've noticed is we have pockets here. Obviously, if you're a surgeon, you're going to work, but it looks like there's some brown staining down in this area of the frock coat. And then, of course, up on the vest itself. Can you tell me what that is? I think I know what it is.
The presumption would be blood.
So we're talking surgery.
Right, he's going to be operating with the surgeon's tools, and amputation, of course, was fairly common. So this is going to be blood.
Now, Brandon, one other question. We're seeing white linen here. A lot of times we think of the surgeons who are wearing, especially in the Army, the blue uniforms, green sash, and then a lot of times they put on an apron. Now, is the white uniform here, is that typical of a surgeon's uniform on a naval ship at that time?
I really don't know.
That's okay.
That's a good question. I really don't. I don't know the answer to that one. So, and I've been asked that before, and I don't know, but I would imagine this would be a little atypical.
Okay.
This is not. I refer to this as a uniform, but it's not really a uniform. This is something he has had made for him to wear. So this is not going to be something that the Navy is necessarily issuing to these surgeons. This is his personal operating outfit. So kind of like the scrubs of the day, I guess you would say.
That's a good description of it. And officers were expected to pay for
their own
uniforms, meals.
This is kind of his working outfit.
Yeah. So whenever he needs to get literally to the surgeon's table, and this is what he would wear. So this is an amazing piece here. That vest, the straw hat. The buttons here are still show that Federal Eagle. So Brandon, this is a really awesome uniform item for the North. Let's check out one for the South, and I think this is your piece de resistance. And we're back with Brandon, and this is potentially the coolest piece that you have here in your collection, or pieces. There are a lot of amazing artifacts here that I'm looking around at, but this one in particular is a uniform as well as a sword with a beautiful leather scabbard. I can see an anchor on it. Whose officer's coat is this? And we do have it identified, apparently.
So this uniform coat belonged to Catesby Ap Roger Jones. If you study the Civil War navies, and particularly the Confederate side, his name will show up often. He was an ordnance specialist in the United States Navy. Once Virginia leaves the Union, his home state, he left the Union as well. One of his early assignments was down here to Columbus, on down to Saffold, Georgia, which is where the Chattahoochee was built. Really, I saw the emerging Chattahoochee River Squadron. He was technically the first captain of the Chattahoochee. After that, he was briefly assigned to Drury's Bluff, at which point he repelled an attack, or partially was involved in repelling an attack from the United States Navy up the James River there at Drury's Bluff. And was mentioned, we don't ever think about making history. What's going to happen after this? Will this ever be in a museum? But Catesby Jones, who probably would not have been wearing this coat comes after, but may have been carrying the sword, was actually firing a cannon at a flag of the Galena, which was one of the ships on that attack, which is literally 10 feet away from this case. So just a connection there with these artifacts.
And with Jones himself, he commanded for a while the CSS Virginia.
Yeah, after that he was the executive officer of the Virginia, ex-Merrimack, and of course Flag Officer Buchanan was wounded in the first day of the battle, so he was actually in command of the vessel the day that it fought the Monitor.
Franklin Buchanan seems to show up just about everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
In the Confederate naval history, from Mobile Bay up to Hampton Roads. And so you said that this coat is something, we were talking off camera beforehand, it's something that he definitely wouldn't have been wearing during that battle.
No, we have tried to figure out exactly when this coat was made, and I actually found in the record where he wrote a letter talking about how his uniform had been destroyed in a casting fire at Selma, Alabama, which is where he was located then, and he was talking about having to pay to get his uniform coat remade and how that was very expensive and Confederate currency was not worth what it once was, and so presumably that this is the coat that he had made that he was talking about. So this would have been later in the war.
It's a beautiful double-breasted officer's frock coat with Virginia buttons on it.
And a very rare example of a Confederate naval gray uniform. You just don't see many of these.
Yeah, it's almost that steel blue gray. It's like a real mix.
Oftentimes people will say, well, this looks blue to me. Well, that gray had some blue dye in there, so it's kind of that, like you said, the steel gray.
And of course, we have the Austrian braiding on the side denoting his rank, but we have shoulder boards as well. They almost look like general stars that are on there. Is that common for the Confederate Navy?
Maybe officially, but in practice, no.
Okay. And to finish off here, we have the picture of him with that, in that coat. We also have a beautiful sword. This almost looks like a presentation sword, and with a leather scabbard. Do we know anything about the sword itself?
This would have been his, of course, personal sword, but probably more for ceremonial purposes, but this was actually his duty sword that he carried as an officer in the Confederate States Navy.
Yeah, and as I'm looking at this, there's some interesting pieces. Number one, there's an eagle head here on the pommel. We have the hand guard, but underneath it almost looks like it's either ivory or mother of pearl handle on it. But what's very interesting is that the area where you see these oak leaves, and you can see the oak clusters, those are actually on what looks like a swivel. And whenever you would draw this sword, those would fall down over your hand. So is that something common for Navy, or just this special presentation?
I have seen this on a few swords. Now, how common this was, I really don't know. But I know on some of the finer, more ornate swords, you will see that folding kind of hand guard there.
Yeah, and again, the scabbard, which holds the sword, made out of leather. You can see the anchor on there with, it looks like 13 stars in a circle. Just a fantastic piece to give us an idea of what an officer's sword would look like. And then this magnificent coat, which is just in immaculate condition. This is just a tasting of the artifacts that you can see here down in Columbus, Georgia. But we're going to go from the small and the edged weapons to the big ones that make a boom outside here. And you yourself might have a chance, if you come down here to this Naval Museum, to fire a cannon. And the National Civil War Naval Museum has some very large artifacts. I think that folks, whenever they come to museums, often think of, maybe a button or a bullet or something like that. You got ships and you got cannons, and this is one of the largest pieces that you have here. Brandon, can you tell us about this cannon that's sitting right along the banks of the Chattahoochee River?
Certainly. So this is a banded Brook rifled cannon. This was one of the most powerful cannons in the Confederate naval forces. This is a 7-incher, so it shoots a 7-inch diameter is the barrel. It's not going to shoot a cannonball. This is a rifled cannon. And we've painted these markings here so you can still see these, but 7-inch, 14,800 pounds, and that's kind of the casting number there, Selma 111, so 111th casting of this particular gun.
So this is made in Selma, Alabama.
Selma, Alabama.
And
brought here to Columbus to put on the ships. We actually have 2 of these sister guns. One was from the Jackson, one of the main armaments of the Jackson. The other one was a pivot gun that replaced a smaller cannon on the Chattahoochee. And these were recovered from the Chattahoochee River. This one is still operational. I mean, the technology is fairly simple. Friction primer and powder charge and a bolt, right? And we still fire this one. We usually do it on special occasions, Memorial Day, July the 4th, Christmas. And of course, it's also available for a private booking. We actually do team building exercises. We've got the whole rope system that people can hook up and use the tackle and blocking pulleys to move the cannon. It's quite fun and very impressive.
It is.
Even shooting a reduced charge, I get it all the time. Well, I've shot a cannon, or I've shot fireworks or a shotgun, but not like this. You haven't. So it's very impressive.
Yeah, and there are different sounds too. It's great to listen to the sound. So when you have just a blank charge, you'll hear that. But if you put a ball on it, they're not firing cannon shells,
No,
just so you
certainly
know
not,
that,
certainly not.
across the Chattahoochee into Alabama. But if you have one on there, it gives you more compression inside that barrel, and that has a different sound to
We
it.
also get the reverb from the riverbank, so you get it twice. Which if that's a good representation, but it's very impressive.
That's what we always like to talk about: the sights, the smells, the sounds of battle, or the sounds of lawnmowers. As we always try, we get those. They chase us around Georgia on our trip. But you mentioned one other thing before we close. The block, the tackle, this is much different than what you would see for an artillery carriage if you say go to Vicksburg, Gettysburg, or else for field artillery.
This is stationary on board a ship. This is a pivoting carriage, so it's designed to pivot. Now, I got to point out, the pivoting carriage is reproduction. The gun tube and the cannon is actual Civil War period. Everything else is reproduction, but pretty close. One thing you have to worry about on a ship is the space you have to work with. So you don't want this to fire and go through the other side of the ship.
Right.
So you have friction brakes, hand brakes here. You would have a rope through the side of the ship, through the cascabel in the back of the cannon, and of course your last line of defense, the bar at the back. But when we're doing through the drills on this, everything is very stationary. Even the sailors are not going to be doing a whole lot of moving around. It's hand the stuff off, like a fine-tuned machine to make this weapon system operational.
So, and this is my last question. We have to load this. Obviously, it's going to go out the portal of a side of a ship. We're going to pull this back a little bit farther and then work with it.
Pull it back, and you would have a few feet in the front of which to load and work your implements through.
Yeah, and so if you ever want to check out the National Civil War Naval Museum here in Columbus, Georgia, you can have the opportunity to watch them fire it, or, as Brandon pointed out, you can have the opportunity to come out here and fire this cannon yourself. So we really encourage you to come down here, check out their website. We hope you'll come down to the museum itself. They have a number of other cannons we'll show you here on the B-roll in just a moment. And this is a really impressive facility that is telling the story of both North and South, the naval side of warfare. We're very close to Fort Moore, which was known as Fort Benning. So we're down here in Georgia, down along the Chattahoochee River. This is a place that you don't want to miss. So Brandon, thank you so much for having us out here today.
Absolutely.
Thanks to Gary Edelman behind the camera, and thanks to you for watching and for supporting battlefield education and preservation.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.